Welcome to Living Well with MS. This podcast comes to you from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, which helps people live a full and healthy life through the Overcoming MS program. We interview a range of experts and people with multiple sclerosis. Please remember, all opinions expressed are their own. Don't forget to subscribe to Living Well with MS on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And now, let's meet our guest.
Welcome to the Overcoming MS Coffee Break, and joining me on this episode is Mirsky, the Overcoming MS Circles Ambassador from Toronto, Canada. So welcome, Jesse.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
And to start off with, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you live and what you do?
For sure, yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Jesse. I'm based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I work for a tech startup here in Toronto, and I also do a lot of volunteer work in the MS community for MS Canada, which is formerly known as the MS Society of Canada, where I lead a support group for people who are newly diagnosed, and also as an ambassador for Overcoming MS, where I facilitate the Greater Toronto Area Online Circle Support Group, the Greater Toronto Area representing, in this case, the Toronto proper, as well as the surrounding area. So anyone in that geographical location is welcome to join our circle.
And I just think, because it's Canada, is that a massive area?
It's quite large, yeah.
Yeah.
It's large enough that we've never met in person, even COVID aside, because we're talking about in the summer maybe doing a meetup, like one, because people do live quite far away. And yeah, it's many different municipalities encompassing. So,
Yeah, we had a Circles meetup at the weekend, and we were complaining about how large a circle is, and they said, yeah, there's people in Australia and Canada.
yep,
Bigger countries.
definitely.
Could you tell us a bit about your MS journey and how you found out about overcoming MS?
For sure, yeah. My journey started just over 3 years ago. I was diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome in February of 2020, and I went through all the available tests and imaging or MRIs, etc. Eventually, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS in August of that year. And early on, I made a decision to learn as much as I could about MS, so I read a lot of books on the topic. Eventually, I found your podcast, so thank you for that, which led me to the book. I read the book in late 2020. And when I did, I felt like I had found something really special.
And what was it? Why did overcoming MS sort of resonate as something to follow?
Yeah, I think the book in particular, it was Dr. Jelinek's voice. It really spoke to me like I'm a relatively intelligent adult. And it was the first time I heard ideas like follow this very healthy evidence-based lifestyle program and still take your DMT with your neurologist guidance if that's a good fit for you. It was also the first time I felt like I had a say in my health and my approach to my MS. So as I mentioned, I'd read a lot of books on MS at that point, and they all seemed to say the same thing, which was, this is what we know about MS, and take your DMT. And there really wasn't much else.
And has your perspective changed at all since diagnosis and finding overcoming MS?
Yeah, I love this question. It's something I think about a lot because honestly, everything's changed. Things that used to worry or scare or give me anxiety, they really don't take up a lot of my time anymore. Through an MS support group here in Toronto, I discovered the concept of grieving for the loss of my former self and finding the new me. And that concept really resonated with me. And in a lot of ways, I actually saw it as a really positive thing. So through that, I embraced dietary, exercise, and mindfulness initiatives fully. And through the process of discovering who this new me is, I made a lot of decisions to cut out toxic elements from my life, whether that's food and lifestyle related, people, or even something like social media. So overcoming MS was a major factor and help in all of this. So today I spend a lot of time, as I mentioned, reading books and exercising, which just a few years ago wasn't the case. I think of that as my mindfulness time, really. And a major accomplishment for me has been getting my drinking under control and quitting smoking.
Because I think if there was a miracle cure tomorrow, then a lot of the things I would still do. In fact, I'd do pretty much all of the things still. I don't think that I would change very much because sort of friends and relatives just think, they say, oh, it would be great, wouldn't it? Because then you could go back to all these things. Like, but I've given up Facebook, but I just think that it just makes me feel so much better in myself, and the mindfulness and the exercise, and actually, yeah, okay, we're having a restrictive diet, but actually it's not just MS, because when you listen to people who are following diets for cancer or for diabetes or for heart disease, it's like, okay, they're basically pretty much all the same. There's a 90% the same. And you think, well, actually, I don't really want to get cancer either. So
I love that.
I would just carry, and once you get eating a diet, actually you realize that the whole food side of it, you're actually eating proper food.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I think I was eating quite a lot of junk.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, everything in the Overcoming MS program and a lot of the different lifestyle-based programs, they may seem extreme at first, but the reality is it's just a healthy diet. I think anyone could benefit from the Overcoming MS diet and lifestyle program. I don't think you have to have MS for this to resonate. Obviously, having the disease is a major catalyst for why you adopted it in the first place. But I totally agree, and I love that you mentioned that all of my lifestyle changes, I don't think about, geez, I really wish I could do X thing that I used to do. I feel just better for it, and I feel like the mindfulness is a real thing for me, whether it's social media, whether it's drinking, whether it's smoking, eating garbage, essentially. All those things I don't miss, and I do feel better for it, not even in relation to my MS.
So smoking is one we don't talk about a lot. It's not actually one of the 7 pillars of overcoming MS, which I find slightly strange in a way, but it's almost like, yeah, well, that's obvious. There's like, you do the 7 things. It's like, yeah, but don't smoke as well. So you were a smoker. So how did you find quitting smoking? Did you just stop instantly? And what would be your tips for someone who is a smoker who's got MS?
Yeah, I really love that you're asking about this because of exactly what you just mentioned. It often feels like it's just something that we throw in. Hey, change your whole lifestyle. Oh, yeah. And then also just quit as if it's an easy thing to do. I would actually say is probably the toughest part of my lifestyle changes. I really struggled for about 2 years with smoking, whereas my drinking, getting that under control was actually almost easy and immediate in comparison. It feels like I tried everything to quit before I got a handle on it, which included things like tracking every time I smoked and then trying to reduce the number of times each day, going cold turkey, reading about how horrible smoking is for your health, so the scare tactics, etc., all those things. At the end of the day, I actually found Allen Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking. That book really worked for me. And it's not unlike what I mentioned about overcoming MS in that book. The Easy Way to Stop Smoking really spoke to me like I'm an adult who just needed to better understand that I didn't want to be smoking. Once that light went on in my head, it actually became a lot easier. So today, I don't wish I could smoke. I don't have cravings, nothing like that. And to me, it all goes back to the emphasis on mindfulness that's promoted in the Overcoming MS program. Diet, exercise, and reading books have essentially replaced smoking as an area of focus in my mind.
I went with a different approach. My now wife, when we got together originally, it was about a week into one of my many attempts to stop smoking, and she asked if I smoked, and she was not a smoker, and I said no, because I wasn't smoking at that point for about a week. She's very anti-smoking. Very, very anti-smoking. Okay. And then I was kind of committed. It's like, well, it's the girl or the cigarettes. I think I've told her I don't smoke, so I need to not smoke. And wow. That's what tipped it over the edge, and we're still married. So yeah, I haven't smoked since.
There were a lot of periods of, making progress and then caving after a week. And honestly, it was, like I said, it was probably the hardest part of the lifestyle changes because I really sort of beat up on myself. I really got down about, I failed. I'm back to square one. So when I finally got a handle on it, it felt like I really overcame a major hurdle in this whole process for sure.
Yeah, no, it's hard though. I mean, I think people don't say, smoking's enjoyable. That's the bit they don't think. If you've never smoked, you think, why on earth would you put that flaming material in your mouth, and that doesn't look. And the first time you ever smoke, when you're young, I think you overcome the dislike for it, but then it is, you enjoy it, and that's the problem, isn't it? It's very habitual. So, in the Overcoming MS 7-step program or 8-step program with Don't Smoke, what aspects do you like most, and have found most straightforward to implement?
So I think exercise is probably my favorite aspect of overcoming MS. It's something I work at every day, whether it's long walks or going to the gym. More recently, I started boxing, so taking a boxing class as well, which has been really awesome for me. In addition to smoking, in terms of what's been difficult, I think the usual answer that I hear from the people I talk to in the community is usually meditation. I would say diet and figuring out what worked best for me was not a simple process either. So I actually follow a different diet that emphasizes a lot of the same values as the Overcoming MS diet: dairy-free, being whole food based, low saturated fat content, and a very similar supplement regimen. And that's the Best Bet diet. So I eat lean meats as opposed to the vegetarian approach of overcoming MS. I was actually a vegetarian for 5 years before my diagnosis. So when I decided to change diet, reincorporating meats was actually an important area for me. I really love and appreciate that Overcoming MS has always been supportive of incorporating other evidence-based approaches into the program. Or my own personal program. We had a long and really helpful talk about this in my circle recently, and I came out of that chat feeling supported by my group and encouraged overall too.
And we've had Matt Embury, who came up. Well, I think his dad came up with that diet, and he's been on the podcast. And equally, he's similar. He's saying though overcoming MS diet will work for a lot of people. If you might have a gluten problem though, which is very common with people with MS. His doesn't have gluten. Overcoming MS does have gluten. So it's finessing, isn't it? The core dairy-free, whole food, low saturated fat diet, I think is core across all of them.
For sure. And I think because MS is so unique to each individual, I mean, I talk to people with MS all the time, and none of us have the exact same symptoms or MRI readings, anything like that. You really have to find what works best for you as an individual. So I think listening to your body is a big part of it. And there's always going to be an element of trial and error too, just to find what works best for you as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's the weird, because I'm out with my circle at the weekend, and it's good because they all understand what it's like to have MS. And someone was saying but the thing is, we're actually understanding the fact that we're all different. It's not like we have a thing that we're all the same. We're actually all completely different to each other, but we kind of get that, and we understand that it's nerve damage, so it could be anything, and it could be completely different symptoms that each of us have, but we kind of understand. I mean, I think there's some core things. I think like fatigue tends to be, and we know there'll be some symptoms that people have. You think, okay, well, that's going to be MS, and well, that probably isn't MS. That's probably, as my doctor likes to tell me, the fact that I'm middle-aged man, so I am going to have a bad back. I do now wear glasses. You're the ambassador, as you mentioned, for the Toronto area. So what's the value of being the ambassador for Overcoming MS?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of volunteer work, as I mentioned, but with Overcoming MS, it's really the people. And I mean, that's true across the volunteer work, but it's definitely a special type of person who shows up to the circle meetings each month. And we have like a really special and amazing community. It's truly just unique. So I come out of our monthly meetings always feeling informed, and I feel like I'm part of an incredible community, which I am. We talk about difficult things, and it's not always easy, but I leave feeling validated and positive just because I know that there are others out there on the same journey as me, which is really consistent with what you just mentioned about we just understand each other as people with MS. It's not necessarily that, oh, you have that symptom, this is what you do. It's really just empathy and listening. And with the Overcoming MS group, it's a certain type of person comes where they've educated themselves. They care a lot about the lifestyle changes that they can embrace. So we have a really, really strong group, and it's usually the same people coming back every month. and then we grow a little bit each month. So it's really amazing to see the impact that we're having just by getting together virtually and having a conversation.
And could you tell us a bit about your volunteer work with MS Canada as well?
Yeah, for sure. So MS Canada recently rebranded, but was formerly called the MS Society of Canada. It's a national organization, obviously here in Canada, that provides services to people with MS and their families, similar, I think, to the MS Society in the UK. In 2021, I started the support group for people who are newly diagnosed through MS Canada. And I've also had the privilege to speak at various events and education webinars, etc. The newly diagnosed support group is a place where anyone still in the early or discovery stages of their diagnosis can come to chat virtually once a month with a group of others who can relate, like we were just talking about. Support groups are really just such a vital sort of part of your health network in those early stages. And I know that for me, support groups have been a major part of my healing process. The group has grown and continues to grow a lot over the last 2 years, and we are now also expanding the offering to include more focused, smaller group chats, which is really exciting too. This support group is currently only open to Canadian-based participants or attendees, but I encourage anyone who's listening and interested and not based in Canada, find your local Overcoming MS Circle or other MS support group. If you're in Canada, you can contact MS Canada through the Navigator network and ask about the ND or newly diagnosed peer support group.
And how do you find the people that are coming along to that? I mean, so with the MS Society in the UK, I've given a talk for newly diagnosed people, and what I found strange is the number of people who weren't prepared to do anything other than take a tablet or an injection, and they literally nothing else. They wouldn't change anything about their lifestyle, and they actually said, "Well, I've got MS. That's bad enough. I don't need to change and do." It's like, but you might be better, or your disease might progress less. That's what I found, and I don't know if that's a UK Canada thing. But do you find that sometimes there's quite a lot of resistance to doing anything?
Yeah, with the newly diagnosed group, it's definitely a far more mixed bag, if you will, of people. So Canada has a really, really high incidence rate of people being diagnosed with MS. So I think it's just natural that our group is going to grow, and we get a lot of new people every month. A lot of people come back each month, but we also see new faces like literally every month. And like I was saying, with Overcoming MS, that's a certain type of person with MS who has taken it upon themselves to embrace a new lifestyle. Whereas you're absolutely right. Sometimes people are not interested. Sometimes people are just like, we get people that are, I was diagnosed on Tuesday and we're meeting today on Wednesday. So in that case, you can't really expect them to have changed their lifestyle or read a book about it or anything like that. But really what we do in the newly diagnosed support group is we offer our experiences. So if someone is curious about a diet, I can tell them about the success I've had with my dietary changes or other lifestyle changes. But we're definitely not, trying to sell them on anything. It's really just a place where if you are that type of person that is not interested in changing their lifestyle, that's okay too. If we can guide you in a direction that will improve your quality of life following an MS diagnosis, we are more than happy to do that. But if you're that person who is just not interested, you are still absolutely welcome, and your experience is completely valid and important to be shared with the group, because I think everyone, regardless of their approach to their MS diagnosis and journey, I think it's extremely valuable to have your input and your experience and your contributions to the community. But yes, to your question, it's you will get people that just don't want to know about that. A lot of the time, they're coming to the group because someone told them they should, and they'll come one time, and maybe they'll hear something that resonates. But it's definitely a different sort of profile of person, generally speaking. Compared to, say, the Overcoming MS Circle that I also volunteer with.
So as someone who gives a lot of advice to newly diagnosed people, if you were to give advice to yourself as a newly diagnosed person, what would that advice be?
For sure. And let me just start by saying I do my best to not give advice. at least to others, to my former self, yes, of course. But I think the real value of volunteer work and support groups is that I'm not there to fix your MS. I'm not there to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing. Like I said, I can share with you my lived experience, what's helped me, what's going well for me. So just as a starting point, I always try to not tell people what I think they should do, but I'm always happy to offer my lived experience, and that's true for anyone in the newly diagnosed support group. In terms of giving myself advice, if I could talk to my younger self, I would say find others who are living with this disease. I have some amazing people in my personal life, and they're here to support me too, and I consider myself very lucky for that. But finding my community and connecting with people who can relate and understand when I'm talking about things like fatigue or double vision or that jelly and tingly feelings in my legs, when I found those people, that was the turning point for me. So through my involvement in the community, whether here in Canada with MS Canada or Overcoming MS, I get to speak to a lot of people living with this disease on a regular basis, and it's become the most valuable and important aspect of my life in a lot of ways. So we've done surveys and asked support groups I work with why they come to the meetings and what they get out of the groups, and the answer is almost always the same. They say things like, I'm here to find my community. I'm here to find my people. And that answer always inspires me and encourages me to keep going.
Right. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us, Jesse Mirsky.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find useful links and bonus information there. Have questions or ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org, or you can reach out to Jeff on Twitter @JeffAlex. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time for tips on living a full and happy life with MS.